Last time we saw the Lockean perspective, and we just touched upon the Platonic perspective, which emphasizes on the active aspect of learning. Now we see that the Platonic learning is influenced or based on the ideas of Plato, and mainly based on the doctrine of reminiscence. Okay, and in this he advocates that all of us, okay, we have some kind of knowledge that is already locked inside of us. Sometimes when we come across something, you may have never seen it before, but sometimes you may feel that, okay, this is familiar to me. Some way or the other, I have seen this or I know this. Okay, this is exactly what Plato tries to emphasize. So, let's take a look at his doctrine of reminiscence. So, we find this doctrine of reminiscence particularly in two of Plato's dialogues. Okay, that is Meno and Phaedo. Okay, so there are many dialogues, around 6 dialogues which you will find, and in these 2 dialogues you have this doctrine of reminiscence clearly mentioned. And in this he says that all of our learning, whatever happens, is basically just a act of recollection. So for example, whatever you are studying in class, it is not something new that you are learning. You have already learned earlier, you are just kind of unearthing it. You are just discovering it. It is somewhere in your brain, you are just trying to locate where it is and familiarize it. And he says this because he believes in the pre-existence of the soul. Okay, then so he feels that souls existed even before our birth. Okay, and they lived in the realm of perfect forms and ideas. Okay, and in this pre-existent state, he says that the soul had direct knowledge of these perfect forms. Then he says that when the soul gets incarnated, or when it enters the human body, it forgets this perfect knowledge that it has. Okay, and that is why, according to Plato, because this has been forgotten, you need to just recollect what has already been learned. In other words, it is just remembering the already forgotten knowledge. And therefore he says that all knowledge is latent. In other words, we need to recall and reflect. Now those who had studied psychology, you all would have an experiment called as recall and recognition, right? So you are shown certain elements before, and then you just have to identify which you have seen. So exactly this recall and recognition is happening according to this doctrine of reminiscence. Now you may ask, what is the role of the teacher? So the role of the teacher is not to impart new knowledge, but it is just to help you or to help the student to recall what is intrinsically known. So what you already have studied, it is just an aid or just a means to recall that. And now we see that in the Socratic method, this was done by questioning and dialogue. So therefore, through questions, he would try to get the answers from the particular person. Now let's take an example from Meno. So here we see that Plato is having a conversation with a slave boy. Now by asking a series of questions, Plato is able to lead the boy to discover certain geometric truths. And this suggests that the boy already had knowledge of these truths earlier. Okay, and therefore we see that this doctrine in a way kind of emphasizes the belief in the immortality and eternal nature of the soul. And therefore, in this way, Plato challenges that knowledge is solely acquired through sensory experience or through observation. Okay, and therefore the emphasis that is given here is more on recollection, inner reflection and introspection. And therefore we see that this method in a way gives an active role to the learners, because you are not being fed with information, but you are just in a way helped to discover, like how the earlier excavations were done. You just have to excavate in your mind whatever you had already known. And therefore, what are the teaching methods this doctrine proposes? Inquiry, dialogue and critical thinking. And therefore teachers are only facilitators. So in this way we see that questioning, dialogue is part of the learning process, and therefore it is learning also tends to be a two-way process in this particular way. And therefore the whole concept of this Platonic perspective is that learners or students already possess information, it is locked in them, we only need to unlock it. And therefore here we see that learning becomes an active process mainly where information is unlocked and rediscovered. There is nothing new that you are learning, it is just something that you are recollecting. And in this way we see that, as you have seen earlier, interaction, class discussions play a very important role. So it is you do something by yourself and you arrive at various conclusions. the role of the teacher is just to guide you on the right path. More of what you do in your dissertation. Okay, you select the topic, you select the books, you select what you want to read, and the guide is just there to help you go on the right path. Okay, if you are deviating from your subject, it is the duty of the guide to tell you, okay, don't go this side, do something. Or if you have chosen a very wide topic, it's the duty of the guide to tell you it is too wide an aspect, narrow down the focus. So the emphasis is on the student, and therefore we see that there is a lot of contribution that comes from the learner. So even when in the class situation, we see that the students themselves contribute a lot through their opinions, through their views, through their sharings. It is not only the teacher that kind of dishes out information, but also there is a vice versa sharing of information. And therefore we see that it is the role of the teacher to create opportunities. Okay, and this is done by facilitating discussions in order to explore ideas and problems. But we see that unfortunately this method, though you all may say is very good, very student friendly, definitely helps us, is not possible every time. Why? Because we see exams have to be there, otherwise how do you evaluate? And secondly, also the time is a factor, because if every class becomes a discussion, then there is no much time available also for input. So for major courses, probably this method does make sense, but when it comes for shorter courses, definitely then we have to find other alternative ways. So when we look at the implications, here we see that it is a student friendly or a learner centered approach. And in a way we see that it also encourages collaborative learning. That means there's a give and take in the classroom, and secondly also we have peer teaching, in the sense students getting together and discussing with their friends, group study is also part of it. How many of you all follow the group study? At least during exams? Do you all come together? Okay, so in this way we see that peer teaching, so when you explain to your friends, it also helps you to understand better, also it helps your friends. So peer teaching also is a very important implication that comes from this Platonic aspect. And also we see that it enforces critical thinking and also problem solving and self-directed learning. So therefore the content of the course for the student is not just restricted to what is being taught. If the student is interested, he can explore other topics in relation to that. Okay, so for example, if you are studying something about religion, and if you are in a way fascinated with the whole concept of soul, okay, the immortality, etc. Now in the class you may just deal with around 10 to 15% of the entire thing. But then if you are interested, you read extra, you explore, and also build up your knowledge on that. Okay, so this is how this learner-centered approach does work. Next, we can compare the two, the active and the passive, the Lockean method and the Platonic method. So we see that Lockean learners are kind of passive recipients of the knowledge. More or less what happens in most of our classrooms, where we see that the professor or the teacher lectures, students listen. Okay, and unfortunately even in other parts of the world, this is a kind of a method which is widely seen. And here we see that this method is in a way dependent on external sensory data or a structured guidance from the teacher. In the sense, it is the teacher that dictates what has to be done, what you are supposed to do, and how you are supposed to do. On the other hand, we see that in the Platonic learning method, the students are more active participants in the learning process. They are the ones who actually are fully involved. They are the ones who understand what is being done, and in this way it also helps them to comprehend, find connections. Okay, and in this way they are able to connect between one topic or one theme and another. So in this way it contributes to already the knowledge that is you have, and we see that it helps you to explore further. You already have an interest in something, go beyond, look for something more that you can find. In this way we see that these two perspectives are kind of two extremes of the spectrum. Okay, and therefore it is important to kind of find some portion in between where you have a mix and match of both. And therefore we see that most of the educational philosophies will fall in between here. Teachers also will try to take in what is the best from Lockean and the Platonic perspective based on the students. In a class with slow learners, mostly you will see that the teacher will have to move towards the Lockean perspective, whereas if the students are quick learners, are quite active, enthusiastic, then the focus will shift towards the Platonic perspective. So also the classroom setup and the situation plays a important role. Also we see that the type of school matters. Okay, in a government school, mostly we see that the direction will be towards the Lockean perspective, whereas in an ICSE or CBSE school, we see that it is more towards Platonic, more towards integration and self-learning. So having said this, we can now in a way look at some practical applications of both these methods in the class. So first and foremost, we see that in the Lockean approach, it is basically lectures. You also have demonstrations, something may be shown to you, kind of videos or clips, etc. And there is direct instruction. So it is just a one-way approach. That is, a teacher towards the student. At the same time, we see that it is a kind of a structured, we have already seen this, it's a structured approach where the teacher is in control. And you also have frequent assessments in order to see the activity of the students. And based on these assessments, few modifications are also made to the method, or should be made. Platonic approach, on the other hand, basically will focus on debates, group discussions, provided they contribute to the subject matter. And therefore, this method or the Platonic approach in a way emphasizes learning beyond what is already prescribed. In a way, you explore various other ways of learning and you in a way explore your topics of interest. And at the same time, here we see that reflection and self-assessment helps to refine the understanding. And therefore we see that in the Platonic approach, more emphasis is given on the student, and the student takes self-responsibility for his or her learning curve. And therefore next what we will see is the nature of the subject matter, in the sense, once again two philosophical extremes, amorphous and a structured learning approach. So these two approaches, amorphous and structured, in a way will represent different views on knowledge. It will also see how knowledge is organized, how knowledge is taught, it also influences educational approaches and policies. And once you have decided how you approach a particular topic, it also influences the teaching method. So in this way you will see that all this what we are doing today will in a way be interconnected with one another. So what do we mean by amorphous subject matter? So first and foremost, it refers to a view where learning is seen as discrete, unconnected, as a collection of discrete, unconnected items. And therefore, every item that is learned is equally important. That means whatever concepts are being taught, all of them are equally important and necessary. There is no hierarchy and there is no relationship between the items that is being learned. So therefore, certain things may appear very disconnected it may not make sense to the student, but still it needs to be done. You may not know why it is happening, but still it needs to be done. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the characteristics. First, in this amorphous subject matter, rote learning. What do we mean by rote learning? Yes, memorizing, learning things by heart, and most of the time this is done without understanding and without getting any connections between various subject matters. And here we see that students are in a way not encouraged to find any connections because it is not demanded, it is not asked for. Therefore, the student also doesn't feel interested in finding connections. The whole thing is whatever is given, you vomit it in the exams on the paper. Next, we see that, as we said, every item in the syllabus is given equal importance. Okay, so nothing is more important than the other. And there is no kind of a structure here. No structure, no hierarchy. And therefore we see that everything being taught in the same manner also can lead to things being monotonous. And when there is no lack of structure, it also leads to there is no integration of knowledge. And therefore, in this kind of learning, it is like it is given in the book, hence you have to study. There is no asking why, there is no asking how. It is there, it has to be done. So, kind of what we do in Latin, languages basically comes under this. You cannot question why a particular thing is there because it is the rule of the language. Okay, so that rote learning has to be done when we study any languages because they have a particular structure. Now, what happens in the teaching perspective here? So, first and foremost, we see that everything is based on repetition plus memorizing no contextual learning. There is no reflection whether it is useful or not. There is no application that takes place. No applying to your context, no applying to what is happening in the country, and as a result of it we see it just remains there as a concept without any relation. How is the assessment done? You have tests, quizzes, assignments, and the whole focus is on recalling. So even the assignments in this nature of subject would be something that has been already dealt in the class. There is no scope for further research. When we look at the structured subject matter, here we see that the subject matter is viewed as something that has relations with its components. That means the subject matter is interconnected. And Jerome Bruner, one of the educationists, said that understanding any subject matter has in a way a natural structure. So in any learning there is always a natural structure which helps to discover and explain new concepts. So, and therefore this structured subject matter will lead towards more of a hierarchical way, where concepts are connected. So what are the characteristics? First and foremost, as we have said, there is a hierarchy. The whole syllabus organized in terms of importance. For example, even in our education system here, you have the something known as credits, right? So major courses will have 5 or 6 credits, whereas other value-added courses may have 1, language may have at the most 2, or some optional may have 3. And we see based on this number of credits, you also have the class hours per week. So therefore, in this structured system, they will organize the subjects based on the importance that it has in the future. Based on that, you will have the number of hours. Based on that, you will have the whole plan for that particular syllabus. This method also provides us with ways to find connections. How different concepts relate to one another. And it encourages an exploration and discovery of new knowledge through existing structures. So the base is provided in the classroom. How you take off or how you launch from this is entirely dependent on the student. And therefore, personal initiative is emphasized. So, when it comes to the teaching method here, one of the most important aspects is the conceptual learning, where concepts are taught with connections. Rather than just giving facts, various interconnections, linking of concepts takes place. This method also helps you to contextualize what you have learned based on the situation and the relevance for that particular situation. And we see that when you contextualize certain things, in a way it helps you to understand the things better. Let's take a simple example. Now, when it came to the Garden of Gethsemane, okay, what happens over there? The agony in the garden, right? What happens over there? Okay, Jesus goes to pray, and then when he comes, others are sleeping. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Disciples are found sleeping. Now, for an average layperson who has not done any theological studies, what do you think will be their opinion? Okay, some of them may say, okay, these fellows are privileged to be with him, okay, and now can't they even be with him, right? So they are supposed to, it is their duty to be there for their master. Some may say that they may be also tired the whole day, therefore they slept. Now when you understand the whole concept of the Passover meal, we can understand why they were sleeping. Because for a Passover meal, okay, the normal quantity would be quite a big quantity of whatever is given. Plus you would have 3 goblets of wine. Okay, 3 big goblets of wine. So after having your stomach full plus having 3 big glasses of wine, it was natural that it would have been difficult to remain awake. So it is only when you understand this concept or you understand this context of the culture of those days does this become clear. Similarly also when Jesus refers to the eye of the needle, right? Camel passing through the eye of the needle. Well, he is not actually referring to a needle as such. He is referring to a kind of a side entrance which was there next to the gates. So only when we understand the context, when we understand how it was in that time, things become easier. You also have something called this sit-sin label. That is putting a particular concept in the existing situation, original situation, and then understanding it from that situation. Okay, because if you bring something out of context, it may not make sense. This is more of an inquiry based learning. So students are encouraged to be inquisitive and the role of the teacher is to provide a scaffolding. Now, what is the scaffolding? Any idea? So, generally, we see that when they are constructing any building, you will see some kind of green curtain put and some structures there. So, the role of the teacher is just to provide these kind of ways for you to reach your goal. Okay, so this is how we see that this subject matter, that is the structured subject matter, can be implemented in the education system. And therefore, we see that we need a kind of a blended approach. We need to have a mix and match of both. Also, teaching should be adaptive to the class, to the situation. So we see that memorization is also important, and also sometimes it is important to have discussions and debates. So when we look at the practical applications in the amorphous approach, it is more used of flashcards and drills. So for example, most probably when you will be studying Greek, okay, for theology, you see that there would be a list of vocabulary that would be provided. Okay, and one of the most effective ways is making small flashcards. So we see flashcards and drills, that is constant recall and recognition is something that is applied for learning languages. Whereas in the structured approach, it is use of concept maps. Have you ever heard about mind maps? So that means you take concept A and then you keep on adding the points. So at the end of it, you have one kind of a diagram, and looking at that diagram, you are able to speak for 10 or 15 minutes. Okay, so those are called as concepts map. So it helps to explore topics in depth, and generally in this approach, more research is encouraged. So now the common question that everybody asks is, what should we develop? Should the IQ be developed or the EQ? Okay, should we focus on cognitive or should we focus on the affective domain? Because we see that both are important, and therefore we need to find a right balance. So we see that we need to balance cognitive and affective domains, because there are different aspects of learning and there is a need to emphasize based on the importance of the particular subject matter. So therefore, there is a preference done based on the hierarchy that we saw earlier. What is relevant and useful. Now, when we look at the cognitive domain, what is focused is the intellectual aspects, that is memory, knowledge. How to acquire knowledge and how to emphasize thinking. And therefore, in the cognitive domain, we see that importance are given to facts that students need to know, they need to know the concepts that underlie that means you need to know what are the concepts behind the facts that have been presented to you, and you're also in a way called to organize what you have learnt. And the cognitive approach will also help you to generalize. You have A, B, C, D, E, F. Okay, based on an observation of all these aspects, you come to a particular conclusion, or you make a general statement. So these are the components generally that we find in a cognitive based approach. Okay, and lastly we see the teaching strategies will be direct instruction, therefore conceptual understanding, that is helping students to connect and question, and of course critical thinking, which will involve analysis, synthesis and evaluation. Okay, so this is basically with regards to the cognitive domain. Next time around we'll take a look at the affective domain, and also we'll take a look at some of the other last few strategies that are there in the introduction. Okay, so thank you.